Unbreakable Boy is the newest Zachary Levi movie that is in quite a bit of controversy. And not because Zachary Levi is in controversy. I don't really want to talk about any of that. Just because it's not relevant to this movie. And while Zachary Levi is a terrible person who, at this point, I would not like to see in movies. If he's good in a movie, I can't really criticize that, right? If his performance is good, what who am I to say anything about that, right? I'm here to talk about movies, right? And so I don't, you know, while I'm frustrated with things Zachary Levi is saying and doing, I don't want to talk about that. I just want to talk about the movie. But why this movie's in controversy is because this movie is made for a crowd. It's and that crowd is older demographic who likes feel good movies. But this movie is portraying a story of an autistic child and this family struggle with that. And there is nothing wrong with wanting to make that a feel good movie, but the way you do that is you have to have people who understand this condition and the things that this kid deals with in this movie and have and knows how to properly portray those things in a very respectful manner that isn't disrespectful to people on the autistic spectrum or in that community. um, and and unfortunately this film is none of those things. um, the This is based on a book. I don't know much about the book, but I believe the author is autistic, and you wouldn't know any of that watching this movie. This movie, I think the guy who actually wrote the book, he actually has an autistic son, and this is based on his journey with his son. And I'm just flabbergasted this movie got made the way it did. This is a movie, by the way, that was finished years ago and was just sitting on a shelf, and you can really tell why. Um, and I also should state before I get further into this review, I am on the autistic spectrum, very mildly so, like at the smallest minute level. And that's the other thing people don't understand about autism. It is a spectrum. So it's kind of hard to. I'm not really here. I don't want to say much more about it than that because that's all you really need to know. I just wanted to mention that because you're understanding where I'm coming from. As a autistic person, I'm seeing certain things in this movie that are just openly disrespectful. And I think, like I said, the kind of movie this is, you have to have some understanding of these people's disabilities or conditions in order to portray that respectfully and with a certain level of grace, and they really don't. So, for example, Zachary Levi is the star of this movie, and not his autistic son. This movie was marketed around the kid in the movie being the main star of this movie. He's not. It's a lot of Zachary Levi trying to figure out and understand his autistic son, and he falls into alcoholism, all this stuff, and there are just so many character beats and moments in this movie that are just straight the fuck up baffling. Let me start with the first one that really bugged me from the very beginning of this movie. Zachary Levi is he gets in this relationship with this girl. They're not married. Finds out she's pregnant. Okay, and he moves in with her like immediately after and she's pregnant. And she's like, "Oh, by the way, I have this bone disease that's genetic." And she does this multiple points in the movie. She tells him things last minute that are pretty big deals. I have a bone disease that's genetic. I've been married multiple times. And Zachary Levi doesn't treat her like the fucking bad guy that she is. I'm sorry. You're about to have a fucking kid with me and you don't tell me that you have a rare bone disease that makes your bones break way easier? Like, these are things to know. You were married multiple times? At one point, they're like about ready to get married, and at that point, like, she's like, "Oh yeah, I was married multiple times." There's points where she doesn't. The only scene that where he really gets mad is when she stops paying bills. But this is like, what the fuck are we doing here? So that's a big problem right there with the movie. You see that go down in the movie. It she has reasons in the movie that explain why she didn't tell him right away, but it doesn't make any better that this character is not portrayed as a villain for doing that. She's like, oh, like Zachary Levi is way too understanding, but somehow is not understanding to his autistic child. To break down why this autistic portrayal doesn't really work, first of all, they have the kid narrating the movie. This kid has a real life, I believe, is actually on the autistic spectrum. It has a little bit of a lisp. Why are you having him narrate the movie? Because he sounds awful. And I'm not trying to be mean to the kid, because I'm sure he's a nice kid, whatever. And when I say he sounds awful, he's hard to understand at certain points during the movie. So when he doesn't need to act on screen, they're having him narrate the movie. When no, he should not be narrating the movie. And especially since some of his narration is showing you or explaining things that they're going to re-explain later. And it's just like, why? Like I said, no disrespect to the kid. I don't have a problem with kids who have lisp. But I think it's a really strange decision to put this kid on blast like that and have him narrating this movie when he can barely talk himself. Just saying. And then the other thing is like, it's there's a part where they find out the kid's autistic, and Zachary Levi asks the doctor, is he gonna grow past this? The doctor just tells him, well, don't expect him to grow past it. I'm sorry, no doctor talks like this, number one. And you should, why would you even, imagine reading a script and reading that line and thinking that's appropriate to put in a movie about autistic kids. Is he gonna grow out of it? Fucking autism? Like, people are not this clueless about autism, are they? Like, genuinely, I don't understand. There's also a point where the only autistic kid in the movie starts shouting the R slur because his parents gave him the wrong medication, and then they block him in a mental institution for 2 weeks without visiting. What the fuck? Now, in context, that sounds a little bit worse than it. Outside context, sounds a little bit worse than it actually is. In the movie, it's still really weird. Like, why are you not visiting your kid? This is just... What is this? There's just so many things and baffling choices made with this movie of just how disgusting this portrayal of autism really is. And I don't blame the kid. I don't blame any of the actors in the movie. I do blame the studio and who's ever looking at this script and some of these pieces of dialogue and the way this movie's framed and going, yep, that's totally fine. You have to understand these disabilities to truly make them work. But how dare someone read the script to this and be like, oh yeah, I approve of the scene where we act like autism might be something that people can grow past. What the fuck are you doing? And just this whole movie's a mess. It's easily the worst film I've seen all year. Which is saying something, because I've seen a couple not so great movies this year. But this is going to be on the worst of the year list just because very disrespectful, very mean-spirited. And I don't think the point of this movie was to be mean-spirited by any means. But when you're watching this movie, you can't help but take that from this movie, because I'm watching this movie, I'm watching them, the way they're portraying this autistic kid, and you're just like, what the fuck are you doing? That's really disrespectful.